Moving on now to the power behind progress. Please welcome to the stage our interviewer, Mika Brzezinski, founder Know Your Value, co-host Morning Joe, and Forbes 3050 Summit Chair. And our interviewee, Linda Rama, co-founder and researcher, human rights advocate, and wife of the Albanian Prime Minister.
Let's do the middle. I'll sit next to you.
Here?
Okay,
Please.
thank you. Together better. How's everyone doing? Okay. Linda Rama. Thank you so much for being on our stage. I really appreciate it. We do. So you're an economist, you're a researcher, you're a human rights advocate, you're also wife of the Prime Minister of Albania. You've supported the country's progress. You've played a pivotal role in social causes, particularly for women and girls. But before all that, you grew up in communist Albania at a time where there was heavy repression and strict isolationism. Can you tell us about that time, especially from the point of view as a young woman, a young girl?
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. I was born in communism and in Albania. And for those that don't know, Albania was the country with the hardest communist system in Europe. And we were called the North Korea of Europe, in fact. And why it was so? Because at a certain moment, the dictator and the political nomenclatura decided to cut the relations from all the rest of the ex-communist countries. So we were on ourselves, building communism or socialism, as it was called, with our own forces. And that was the end, in fact, of the logic behind that, because after that, it was everything on ourselves. As a child, I remember that, and even now that I try to think sometimes about that period, I had everything I wanted to have, because I had care and love. I had my parents, I had my friends, my neighborhood. My very limited toys, most of them were just created. We didn't have even toys that time, but I was happy. But then over time, the cracks, as I was growing up, started to show. There were many like this. For instance, I was understanding that the life of my parents was extremely difficult, and it was very difficult for them to raise us. And I remember that every conversation home about the difficulties was ending up, not only for them, for the others as well, by saying that, what to do? Life is a battle. And that being a battle was the only meaning the life had during communism. And then something else I remember very well was fear. Fear was like a glue that kept the society together. For instance, when we were very young, we were constantly told by our parents not to whisper anything. What we were talking in the house for difficulties outside, not to trust anyone, and to keep our head down. Because it was just one word, wrong word, told to the rest, so to the others, that could put the family completely in hell. And what I see in these 2 days, it's amazing, because girls and women tell here things that were told to them or experience that they had that was completely the opposite what we had those times. And then it was hypocrisy. We were taught all the time to be hypocrite.
Really?
Of course. Because if you know that something is this way, you feel difficulties, and you are told to do another thing, then it's completely living in hypocrisy. And then borders were completely closed. There were only around 2,000 people entering the country per year, and they were all from the world that was called similar to us, so Marxist-Leninist countries, groups. And then religion was forbidden. I remember my grandparents fasting Ramadan, and they were saying to us not to tell anything outside about the rituals during Ramadan, because the system decided at a certain point of time, in 1967, if I'm not wrong, to ban all religions. And we are a country of 3 religions, main religions, and this is one of the biggest value we still have and we share with the world. And we ended up in the most extreme poverty at the end of 80s. But over years, after that system fell, I understood that poverty was not the biggest problem we had from that regime. I think that it was the trauma.
Trauma.
Because if circumstances are changed, you can deal with poverty and you can take opportunities to recover. But even though you might have a good economy, it's very difficult to escape from the trauma you had. And the trauma was not for one person, for one group, it was for the whole population. So we started transition as very traumatic people with big dreams, big ambitions, and I think that we had to deal with the traumas we had all the path through.
Life revolved around fear. As there was the transition that you lived through, Albania's transition from communism to a democratic system in the 90s. Do you have memories of that period of how life changed for you?
I started to work right before the communism fell. So I had 4 years of experience during communism. And I started in a big combine. It was with more than 7,000 people, workers. And in fact, I was lucky to have this experience because I was able to see how all the propaganda about a very strong economy, in fact, was ending up in combined with very difficult conditions for workers. I saw it in practice with very distorted relations in between them and the jobs, in between them and the property that was a common property. And I remember very, very well the years when the communism fell, because we were completely somehow in chaos. We didn't know what was coming, and the only wish we had that was keeping us alive, that we were at the eve of being free from communism. And I remember that massive insecurity, but at the same time we thought that being free from communism, suddenly we will end up immediately like Europe or America. Right. In fact, that was not so. And in fact, now that more and more I think of that period, we knew nothing what was coming, and nobody knew. And when I say nobody, it was even those that were appearing with new parties, with, being at the head of whatever movement was around. And I understood over years that the biggest lessons and the biggest learning was by our mistakes. Mm-hmm. We were doing through the way. And believe me, learning because of mistakes is very painful and is with the extreme cost for the whole population.
So you're the author of some 50 publications focused on, as an economist, on economic, social, and civil development in Albania throughout these transformative decades. I'm curious, based on your research, what were the keys to the success, and also what are the remaining challenges?
We ended up at the end of communism as survivors. Being a survivor, you are a fantastic fighter.
A warrior.
A warrior. And I think Albanians were warriors, real warriors. Whoever, those that left the country to emigrate, there were many of them that have chosen this way, and those that remained in the country to go on. And another, I think, characteristic for us was the dreams. Living in such an isolation, we were able to have big dreams and to be very ambitious, to give the maximum of us. And I think that throughout these 35 years, Albanians, wherever they are in the world, and Albanians in Albania, have made the biggest transformation in the history of the country. Imagine at the beginning of last century, so before the Second World War started, the country was 90% illiterate. And now we are, I think, the country ahead compared to all countries in the region that is sitting with European Union for the membership process. And this is quite an unbelievable, transformation. We sit in the same tables, we speak the same language, we share the same ambitions, and we share the same values. So Albanians have managed over this 3.5 decades to overcome, I think, a large part of all the trauma that they had and to recover well from whatever we had. A few days ago, there was one event in Berlin. It was the International Tourism Fair. That is the biggest event, in fact, for tourism. And Albania was the country of honor, because last year we had the biggest growth of tourism in Europe. Those that don't have still Albania in the list, I would really invite you to have it, because as my dear husband says, in case you decide to come once, you like always to revisit. So we would be sure that you would come to us again.
And Madam Rama, you've spoken about the importance of an open society, human rights, particularly for women and children. How did this interest and sort of passion really develop in you personally from what you experienced in your life?
Now, in 1991, civil society was an unknown word to us. So no one had a clue what civil society was. But we were lucky enough, because even though we didn't know anything, there was all democratic world waiting for us and ready to help. And in 1991, the communism fell. In 1991, the world, the advanced world, the progress world was there for us. So we had humanitarian aid organizations coming to us. We had USAID since 1991 being with us. We had UN organizations, all there, agencies, all there for us. And we had bilateral agencies like for Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Nordic countries was a big support for us, and Holland, and I don't know, from wherever the world. And I think that this was somehow for us a miracle. It was not the financial aid that they were giving to us. It was not food they were distributing to a very poor population at the beginning of transition. The most important thing of their presence was the message given to everyone that we were not alone. And you can't imagine what does it mean for someone in need, and for a country in need, and for the whole population in need, to have other peoples coming from abroad in the country that was completely locked up few years before, or few moments before, there to help. And we have been the ones helping. We are a small nation, but I can give to you 2 episodes that really are very close to my heart during the Second World War. We are the only country in Europe that didn't submit any Jew to Nazis during the war. And we ended up with more Jews at the end of the war than Jews being at the beginning of the war. And one man that had 2 Jews hosted in his house, was asked by Nazis to submit the Jews, and instead he submitted his two own sons. And this is a known fact. And in the list of martyrs of the Second World War in Jerusalem, you have two people with completely different names, and are those that were submitted by this man. Because for our country, according to a law that was in 15th century, the house of Albania is the house of God and the guest. And this has remained as part of our culture throughout our history, and we are very proud of this. And it was another story that had amazed me. I learned it years before. It was about 13 American nurses landed on emergency situation in Albania during the war. And it was unimaginable, the effort to save these 13 nurses from Nazis so that they could flee the country safe. Every village that they went through, held by peasants or villagers, and every person that helped them was either killed and the villages were burned. And it was the irony that after the communism came into power after the war, all those that were helping, that remained alive, were destroyed by communists because they were considered collaborators. And in fact, the 13 girls were escaping safe. They went to America, and there was a documentary a few months ago prepared, and we could hear their children and grandchildren talking about their grandmas and their, the history they knew. And we are proud of this. Like, we share whatever we have achieved, and we are very grateful to all those that have been in Albania to help us and are still in Albania to help us, because transforming from an extreme communist country to a democratic country is a long path, and you cannot do it alone. And this is how I think the world become, by helping that the progress spreads in the map. In fact, you work to increase the safety of your nation, but at the same time to make the world better for yourself and for the others.
I'm going to expand upon that in a moment, but you mentioned your dear husband. As an economist and a researcher, being the wife of a prime minister, I'm curious, how do you decide what issues to speak out on, what issues not to? What's that like, balancing it?
There are people always, journalists or others. It is an artist, by the way. And you imagine an artist being the prime minister for 12 years. And he was before mayor for 12 years, mayor of Tirana. So people ask me usually how you can deal with such a man that is an artist, full of charisma.
That's a lot right there.
And what at a certain
for
point, I was looking, okay, at the beginning I was trying to give an answer, but then to one of the journalists, I said, can you imagine a prime minister being in the house with a professor of public policies, with a researcher?
Well, he can learn.
And then with an activist. So I die for those cases that I don't agree to go in front of his office and to start doing my activity. I don't do that, but in the house, I take all the opportunity, and he cannot escape from the house. I take all the opportunity to share. But you know what? What I try to do is that what I have learned over years is to be patient. Because, and you know, to give somehow time to myself to understand better. Because the massive information remains to those that exercise their duty every day. And we, watchers, let's say, and analyzers from the distance, we might not have the whole information. We might not catch the vision right away. So I have learned to wait. But of course, I am a big resistant to my arguments, so wait for having more arguments, while Eddie, I think with time, has increased a lot his passions and his capability to hear. And I think that that is amazing, this combination, because we can somehow be very, let's say, helpful to each other.
We have to wrap it up, but I can't help but to ask this last question. As you look and see what is happening in the world right now, the war in Ukraine, the crisis in the Middle East, Donald Trump is president. What are your biggest fears and what gives you hope?
Albania is a small country, but it has a huge, huge history. And what I have learned, one of the things I tried to say was that, you know, the world is in a learning process. We have been learning a lot. I think that we can consider this way. We are in a learning process in a very amazing time. And you know what? We have been putting a lot of efforts in creating the rights for three generations of rights. And we were just at the eve of the fourth generation of rights, which are not yet there. And I refer here to the rights in the time of digital revolution and of AI. And we have to learn our kids, to teach our kids not to take for granted the rights that are achieved. Because the biggest risk is that this might happen. This needs resistance by us. This needs a lot of clarity by us, but this needs somehow another conversation to the generation that do have these rights. And while we are doing all this kind of conversation again together, and this is another discussion very interesting to me, is what kind of rights we do have and protection we do have for another planet where we are inhabitants, that is the planet of virtual world. We are every day acting in that planet, in fact, owned by big techs. And we don't know what they do, which are their ambitions, which are their purposes, and how to protect ourselves. We have all these big, let's say, agreements in the, do you agree? Do you accept cookies? Do it? But we are so busy with our own life that we do it, accept.
Right.
Yes, agree. I don't know whether any of you have read at least once the whole bunch of words that are in the screens. I don't think so. And yes, because we are busy in the planet we are living.
What are we accepting to?
And
are we signing our lives away?
Yes, and I think that we have to concentrate at these times. Of course, wars are top in the agenda because we don't want wars. I know what does it mean very well in person. What does it mean to go back to isolation and wars? But apart from that, we have a full agenda with all the challenges that are in front of us. I think that we are lucky because we know a lot and we can leave the world much better when we would not be around, by being all together, by sharing the values, by resisting, and by making our kids capable to take whatever challenges would be ahead of us. So I see the world much better, and years, so 3 decades ago, I couldn't imagine to have met one of you. And in 3 decades, I am with, I don't know, 200, 300 of you around. And this is, believe me, a miracle that happened for the generation of my age living in communism.
Madam Linda Rama, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I was very honored to be here.